Right, so I'm very sceptical it's gonna hold
Let's go for it. No, it's cutting out again.
The shoe!
No, it's me, I'll just give up. Right, yes, thank you so much. And thank you for sitting through the AGM. It's not particularly exciting, but I appreciate you listening. So I'm Julia Ellis, I'm chair of the Institute of Fundraising South East and London region. We're all volunteers and we are totally committed to promoting the highest standards of fundraising practice, thank you, through networking, training and mentoring. We are filming tonight, so if you're not happy to be filmed, will you please let one of the committee know and we'll make sure that you're not featured basically. So committee, will you make yourselves known please? Me too. Okay, so there you go, that's us. You still can't hear me? No. Right. That's the front end. Okay, I'll just know about that. So do come and chat to us. We're a very friendly bunch. We're also recruiting new members. So if you think it might be something you'd like to consider joining our committee, then we would love to have you on board and please speak to one of us. That'd be great. If you're not already a member of the IOF, and there are a few new members here tonight, then please do consider joining. It's something crazy like £8.67 a month, which is the cost of the gym in the expensive pub in London. And I appreciate that as impoverished fundraisers you might not go to expensive pubs, but trust me, it's not very much. And you get loads and loads of benefits. You get a fundraising magazine delivered to your door every month. You get reductions on training courses, and you get £5 off the ticket price for tonight's event. So it very quickly pays for itself. We would love it if you tweeted about tonight's event. The Wi-Fi code is on the wall. I don't know if you can see it. It's Hub King's Cross Fast, and the password is Impact Makers 2019 exclamation mark, and then you just put your access code in at the end of it, and then you're in. So please do tweet. The hashtag for the event is hashtag IOF Thursday. We've got 3 Twitter handles. So Clark Sadi 84, tweets from Lily, and Danak Sigal. If you need to check the spellings or didn't hear me, just check out my tweet. I'm at Juliet_Ellis, and all the speaker Twitter handles are on there. Finally, I'd like to thank our wonderful sponsors, without whom we wouldn't be able to put these events on for such a reduced price. We've got Vicky from Eden Brown here tonight. Eden Brown, possibly the best, well, definitely the best.
That was the last night that's
people in the sector, and they're just so lovely. So talk to Vicky if you're thinking about moving jobs or you're recruiting for people in your teams. And then we also have Angus somewhere. Where's Angus? Oh right, I thought you were going to slip out the flag, but Angus is at the back there. And from Sappho, our other sponsor, and they are probably the best, definitely, possibly the best digital lottery operator in the entire world. You're going global now, aren't you? So again, speak to Angus if you think that digital lottery could be good for your charity. So that's it from me, pleased to know. And I'm going to hand over to Vicky from Eden Brown, who's going to introduce tonight's session.
Possibly the best introduction ever, so I don't really feel like I need to say more. We are specialist recruiters across the third sector, but I'm not really here to speak about us. What I am here to do is introduce the wonderful Akak, who is Head of Philanthropy and Partnerships, Trustee at Mind in Harrow, and Trainer and Board Member at the IOF, so man of many talents. And you're going to introduce the rest of the panel tonight, so thank you. Cheers.
Thank you so much, Vicky and Juliet, and good evening, everyone. I'm Akhlaq Hussain. As Vicky has kindly introduced me, I'm Head of Philanthropy at Orphans in Need, which is a international children charity. I'm also a board member and a trainer for Institute of Fundraising, South East and London. Can you hear me now? Cool. So I'm also a trustee for Mind in Harrow, and I write for various media outlets within the third sector, such as third sector and UK fundraising. So I'm not trying to be cheesy, but this is how I genuinely feel that looking around the room here, I'm really inspired to see that at this time of the evening, instead of spending your time, your personal time at home with your families, you have chosen to come here. I really appreciate that. And let me tell you that as well, that research across the sectors, not just the third sector, says that time and time again, that learners are the leaders. So this commitment shows me that you are the true learners and you are either current leaders or our future leaders in the sector. So well done for coming around and for this evening and joining us. We really appreciate that. And I really hope that our this session will be really, really fruitful for you, for every single one of you. Before I introduce my guest speakers, I would really like to know that how many of you actually work for charities under £1 million and you are raising money from major donors, or you are thinking of raising money under 1 million. Okay, cool, thank you. So the majority is over 1 million, just for an idea of every single one of you. Without any further ado, I would like to introduce my guest speakers for today. So Lily Davis, hello.
Hello.
Can you please raise your hand so everyone can see that? So Lily is head of philanthropy, trust and special events at Barnardo's, and Lily also helped to establish the first innovation team at Marie Curie. And then next to her is Dr. Anna Maria.
Hi. Hello.
She heads up major gifts at Langdon Foundation. She holds a diploma from Institute of Fundraising, and she also holds a PhD. Probably the only PhD person I've seen. And she's also a member of the Major Donor Special Interest Group. Thank you so much for joining us. So next to her is a good friend of mine, Keith. He's a senior philanthropy advisor at the Save the Children. He's basically leading African philanthropy initiative and to end malnutrition campaign at Save the Children, and which was launched early this year in 2019. And he has already managed to raise £5 million. That's brilliant. And next to him is Dana Sago. She's a fundraising management consultant, and she's currently a senior partner consultant at the Management Center. She's also a director at the Adapt for Arts and deputy director at the National Arts Fundraising School. She's a board member of the IWF's Cultural Sector Network. So welcome all, and thank you very much for joining us for this evening. So what are we discussing today in this panel? We have 5 different themes for you. So the first one is, a lot of people have been asking that how to really make a good use of special events for major donors. And people have always also been wondering that are the major donor special events still alive or they are dead? So we got Lily for that. She specializes in that area, and she is going to answer that question for us, that are major donor events or special events for major donors really working, and how we can make best use of it.
Okay. Can everyone hear me? I'll try it. You know what? I'm gonna just shout. So in terms of my journey with special events, I first started working in special events about 4 years ago now, 3-4 years ago. And my first impressions of it were that it's very expensive. People get really bored. It's a long time for the fundraisers. It's a long day, and then you've either got to give people back toil, and it builds a bit of resentment up. And I started off approaching it in a really negative way. At that time, I worked for a much smaller organisation. This is still buzzing, isn't it? Sorry. All right, okay. And every penny that we spent really did need to be maximised. There was no room for error. There was no element of, well, you know, 10 grand here, 10 grand there, we can absorb that in the wider budget. So we needed to be really smart about how we used it. But what I'd say is, and what I've learned certainly from my experiences, is that special events needs to be viewed alongside all of your other activities and use it as an enhancement rather than being seen as an income stream on its own. So what I mean by that is, yes, okay, you can spend 50 grand on a gala dinner, make 150, but you could take that 50 and take that into some other activities. That, in terms of ROI, which is the metric that we all think about and get measured by, and it's the one that keeps us up at night. But actually, if you look at the outputs from the event kind of 6 months ahead of time, and use it as an opportunity for engagement. So a couple of examples of what I mean by that. An event is a good opportunity to pick up the phone to someone and say hi. They might not want to come, but it's a good opportunity to get them in through the door. And the traditional model of gala dinners at the V&A and all of that good stuff, it's still alive, but if you can try and find a hook to get into a specific audience and make that really tailored, you'll have a much better chance of getting someone in through the door. Once you've gotten them in, it's then about wowing them and giving them a platform for what you do, and that's one of the other things that special events can really act as a platform for. And then the final element, and the one that is possibly the most tiring, is follow-up, but it's really important. And as long as you're maximising that, and my team absolutely hate me, because within 24 hours I want to see all of the follow-ups, initial follow-ups at least, gone out. That includes thank you letters, auction follow-ups, and even if we have to split it up into lots of different chunks and we all get on the phone and we all do it, at least that way you've struck while the iron's hot. Whereas if you wait for a few days, then people have gone and gotten on with their lives. One example from recent times of a special event that has yielded much larger income potential than just on the night itself, that I'll finish off with, is we held an event at Merchant Taylors Hall in March. We had about 24 tables of 10 in the room, and right at the back of the room, one of the tables, sat one person who spoke to one of our fundraisers on the night. About 3 months on from that, we were pitching in front of the boardroom of a very major corporate, and we've now signed on the dotted line for a 3-year partnership that's worth over £1 million. So it is annoying, it's late nights, it's a lot of money, but it doesn't necessarily always have to be if you can get the sponsorship as well. So that's what I'd say for all the fundraisers at smaller charities, is think creatively, see what you can use, but it can yield great results. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Lily. The next question, the next theme is that how smaller and relatively medium organizations can build a stronger relationship with major donors, and I would like to ask Anna Maria to answer that for us.
Hello? Is that going to work? Hello? I think I'm just going to talk rather loudly, and I'll also stand up as well. Won't suit you.
Yeah, I don't know why I did that.
I don't know, it's a good way of projecting your voice. So anyway, hello, I'm Anna Maria, and I work at Langdon. And I would say that regardless of whether you are in a small or large charity, the important thing about relationships, it doesn't really matter at all. You are working with people, and what I love about major donors is that working with major donors is that it is very much a person interaction, and you're dealing with that person and that individual and learning a lot about them. And I think one of the advantages of being in a smaller organisation is that it is a lot easier to access people and networks, perhaps more than in a larger one. But if you can, and be persistent as well, because it does take time. I remember for one donor, it took me about a year before he even answered my email at all. But once he did answer my email, and I got to speak to him, and actually to learn a lot more about what he was interested in, because we had been sending him lots of stuff, or would you fund this, would you fund that, and he just wasn't interested in anything at all. but what he was really interested in was in our education unit. And once he learnt about that, then and we had a project coming up. We directed it to him. Then he actually gave a significant amount of money to that. The other thing I would say very much is that is to use your networks as well. I'm very lucky that at the charity that I work at, we have a lot of community leaders, and they're out in the community, and it makes it a lot easier to be able to get them to open up their network and introduce you to people. And at the moment I'm actually working with our chair of trustees, and he's given me a few dates and to get meetings together and actually meet with our donors, not to make any asks at all, but to actually find out more about them, their experiences with the charity, what they like, what they don't like, and how we can improve. I did actually meet up with one gentleman, which I thought was, was very nice. He invited me to his home, it was lovely, and then he just spent about an hour and a half just complaining to me about the charity, the community, about giving, the state of the country. He just had a massive rant at me, but I thought that, well, you could hear that and thinking, oh my goodness, this is an absolute nightmare, but you can turn it around to an opportunity, and it's like, well, what can we do to make it better? And he just wanted us to just listen, and that's what he wanted us to listen to his complaints, and what can we make it better. And he said he would like to speak to another one of our trustees at the charity, and to sit, to look at more about how, because we're a care charity, how perhaps parents could actually help more with their children, sort of thing. And that was fair enough, and us taking that on board as well. I would say one more thing about what's really key and in building strong relationships is how you actually communicate with your major donors. You might think that if you're in a large charity, you might have lots of major donors and think, how am I going to speak to all these people? Well, Lily was saying, look at your chest. Lily was saying that a key thing, a really good way, is being creative about how you communicate. And something that I've started doing is to actually have a newsletter that is dedicated to major donors. And all it talks about is about them. It's like I have interviews with them, parties that they've been to, projects that they've sponsored, projects that are happening that they might be interested, things that have happened with the beneficiaries, volunteers working with beneficiaries, and it's been hugely popular and so successful that actually just last week a really large national trust actually got in touch with our chair trustees, and he picked up the newsletter, the patron, it's a hardback copy, picked it up, and he actually said, I can see you're doing lots of projects, I'd like to actually talk to you. So it's opening doors as well. So be innovative in how you communicate with people. You don't need to just always have special events or face-to-face meetings. It can be on the telephone. I had one person who doesn't like going to events, doesn't like having face-to-face, but was happy to speak to me on the phone and learn lots about them. And I think the other key thing is listening to your donor as well. And sometimes not even talk about the charity at all. You can learn a lot about, make a connection with them. I met one lady who's the chair of a big trust, who was, and our connection, what we connected was in education. I used to be a teacher many years ago, and we connected about education and our passion for education. And we just spent the whole time talking about that, and we built a relationship that way. And it was really beneficial, because when we had to, at my last charities that had to transfer funds and then make an ask at the same time of over 100k, it was great, because we had built up that kind of trust and connection. So I would say it doesn't matter whether you're in a large or small charity, you're working with people, and it's really important to just make friends with them. That's what the key thing with major donors: make friends, find that real big connection with them, and listen a lot. That's what I would say. Thank you.
Thank you very much. next theme has been floating around as well, especially in the past 6 months, is about diaspora giving. Are things really changing within the diaspora giving, especially when we talk about major donors? Charities are trying to find new avenues and new pots and new piece of cake to grow their philanthropy. How can they do that? So what is actually happening in diaspora giving? Can we be as a sector successful in diaspora giving? And is there actually money sitting there for us to actually start that diaspora giving programs? So I'm going to ask that question to Keith, that because he has been working in that kind of arena, that he can guide us on that specific question.
Thank you.
Over to you, Keith.
Yeah, thanks. Good evening, everyone. I can talk about diaspora giving for 10 hours. I can talk about it for 5 minutes, but I'm going to try the latter. I work with Save the Children, and in the last 5 years, we have looked at how we can raise money outside the UK. And we have set up programs that raise money in the Gulf, and we've also set up recently programs that raise money in Africa. And also programs that raise money and are targeting the diaspora in the UK. People who live here, but were not necessarily born here, but make a living here, are invested in here. And I can categorically say that as a sector, we know very little about what their interests are, why they give, and how we can make them give. And so I will just share a few lessons that I have learned having worked in the diaspora that comes from Africa here, and also worked in some of the bigger economies in Africa, and how I'm still trying to get them to give at a level that they should be giving. One of the lessons that I've learned is that unlike 50 years ago, money has moved. We used to have more money coming from the western part of the world. It's not the same anymore. There's money in China, there's money in India, there's money in Nigeria, and all these are potential donors. As a sector, we are still largely focused on raising money in the UK, and all the tools, which are very brilliant tools, are largely designed to address donors that are in the UK. So I think that is one of the lessons that we can take away as a sector. How do you actually reach out to a Chinese donor who has a house in Knightsbridge, therefore they're interested and they are living here? How do you actually begin to tell them about your charity? Because they want to know, after a year they are living here, the Saudis are here all through the fast. So how do you ensure that actually as a sector, we are actually typing into that money that should actually be coming into our supporting our charities? I've also learned that philanthropy has become more personal. It's very, very telling someone about some charity that you're doing or some work that you're doing that has no connection to them. It has even become even more amplified. So if you're going to go to a donor that is living here but they're Indian, what is that you're going to tell them that is actually obvious to them? Personally, because I raise money from Africa, the first thing that I ask these people is, where are you from? So for example, the money that we told you about, I raised a check of £5 million from one donor who's Nigerian, but he gave that to us because as Save the Children, we actually work in a region that he comes from in Nigeria. But not all of us are that lucky that we work internationally. However, I also have another Nigerian supporter who was literally, who was on the streets, and he had to get himself out of that mess, and he gives a lot of money to Centrepoint. Now, Centrepoint only works in London, but you can see the relationship. They had to cultivate him and get that interest of why he should be giving. These diaspora donors, I feel that they tend to look for, as opposed to the traditional recognition that we are used to giving donors of, you get onto the website, we put you on the wall, we send you a card, which are all brilliant things. But they're also looking for influence. How do you ensure that a donor from from India can influence the programs that you give? Can they be part of the way we design our programs? I find that increasingly they are asking for that. How can they be influential? How can they use their network? How can they use their resources? They just don't want to be a cash cow. So I find that in the diaspora, I'm beginning to be asked more and more, how can I actually influence the work that you're doing? Where is the direction of this charity going? And also, most especially, how accountable can we hold you when you are halfway across the world? There is no limit to how much money they have. It's shocking. Literally, there is no limit to how much money is in India, in China, in Nigeria. If you think there's money in the UK, the money outside the UK is mind-blowing. So in terms of, before you even to start to prospect, before you even convince your trustees that it is good to look at the diaspora, think about it. Anyone who is in the diaspora and lives in Zone 1 and is not British is going to be not a millionaire, a multi-millionaire. Because to move here and buy a house and you're not born in Britain, you have to be a multi-millionaire. So there you go, I've done your prospecting for you. So already that is a start. Of course you have to do your due diligence. You don't take money from anyone, but already there is a lot of money that we are not designed to tap into. What we normally do is that old-fashioned things, or we look at someone's postcode, are they in the Sunday rich list, are they called a lord, a lady, or a duke, which is probably they're the poorest people now. So it's you have to think creatively. How do you actually get to know who has wealth? And they're not going to appear in the papers. They're just going to land in Heathrow and land out. And you have to find ways in which you're going to get them. And then finally, the narrative has changed. Remember those TV adverts that had the African child with the flies, and they're playing classical music and telling you to give them like, what, £5 or whatever? Never ever use that, ever again. Because it's offensive, it's rude, it just means that you have no understanding of the outside world. The narrative has changed. If you're going to raise money from Africa, use African voices, use African stories. If you're going to raise money from India, use the same. It doesn't matter where they are, you just have to be authentic and change your narrative, regardless of what charity you work from. So those are the few lessons I can share with you today. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Keith. Next, we are going to discuss what are the major trends within the arts and cultural sector. Over to you, Dana.
Thank you. And just before I start, hands up if you work in the arts, cultural, heritage sector today. Excellent. Oh, good. Lovely. Lots of you. Great. So my colleagues here will know that the arts and cultural sector generally makes up around 2% of overall individual giving. But actually it really holds court in the major donor space. So Coots reports show that it's around 12% of the total major giving that goes to arts, cultural and heritage charities. So, you know, there are strong organisations, particularly in London and the South East, that have been able to cultivate really significant relationships with major donors. And two examples that I want to draw on in terms of projects that are recent projects. The first being the Royal Opera House refurbishment, which was a £50 million capital project. The second being the V&A Courtyard, which was a £40 million project. Both of those teams secured those donors. There's less than 15 donors for each of those campaigns. So if anybody's thinking there is not the ability to cultivate major donors in the arts, culture and heritage space, you are wrong. You are just not doing it. You are not putting in that time, that investment and that resource. So I think capital, interestingly, in that space is still a very attractive proposition for major donor support. It's quite well established, it's a very attractive proposition, and there's still the attraction for the naming rights and those elements of it that can be brought in. In terms of the trends and the types of donors that we have in the arts and cultural sector, they generally fall into, I suppose, two to three categories. The first, which is sort of both, is You definitely have your professional philanthropists and what I would call your cultural inheritors. They might come from a long family line of philanthropy. They understand the mechanics of how it works and the tradition of it, and they respect the kind of more traditional aspects of doing so. And that's where the arts, culture and heritage normally forms one part of a wider portfolio of giving. There's names we know in this room, Lord Duffields, we know these names, I think, in the arts, culture and heritage space. It's a long line of traditional philanthropy, so there's kind of an association and a desire to do that, and an inherent value that they understand as to why they might give to a charity that is less tangible than a lot of your causes here today as well. I'm kind of interested, and I'd like to hear from you questions about where's the next generation of those people, and actually with a lot of ethical questions around some of the people that we've worked with, and a lot of high-profile press coverage about large organisations pledging to refuse funding from a lot of families. What does that mean for our sector in terms of that more traditional side of the philanthropy? The second category I often refer to as what I would call the sort of altruistic entrepreneurs. They are the self-made people who have reached a position in their lives where they are millionaires, multimillionaires, and feel a duty to give back. And generally what we're seeing in terms of trends with those donors is that they love to give the money, but they also like to give the time, and they also really want to feel involved. So what we see is that they like to join boards and advisory groups of organisations. There's also an interesting trend with challenge events. So one example I wanted to draw on was the Roundhouse in Camden. Their chair did a trip to the North Pole, which actually raised them £250,000, and he did that as a kind of traditional challenge event. So he raised that fund from his circle. I don't think they would have got that income in the same way had they done the usual patronage route, but it's interesting that he could leverage such a major gift in a different way, in a way that was more in tune with him, who he was as a person, and less traditional in its philanthropy. So I think the challenge event space for our major donors is actually a very interesting way to look at how we might unlock their networks in that way. And then the third, as we touched on today, is the events and the galas. There's still a desire for them to happen, and it's a way of being involved, it's a way of feeling really part of something. So we're seeing that they like to enjoy and give in those ways as well. I also wanted to flag board giving as quite a hot topic and a hot trend. There's lots of talk about it at the moment. Does it work? Does it mean, if your board are all giving, does it mean that you're able to then better leverage donors? I would say for some of the small and medium charities out there, it's definitely worth considering. From my own experience as the chair of an outdoor arts organisation called Emergency Exit Arts, we ran a crowdfunding campaign, and the first thing I did was invited my fellow board members to give, relative to their income, relative to their ability to do so. What happened was about halfway through the campaign, we were approached by a potential donor who asked if the board had all contributed. They were able to say yes, and he actually provided a donation that was 25% of the target that we needed to raise. So it's a very interesting, it's one case study, but I think it's a really important piece of advocacy to think about the importance of your board in terms of leveraging some higher donations if you can. I mentioned ethics earlier. There's lots of discussions about it. There's lots of high-profile coverage. The Sackler case, I think, probably being the most high-profile of recent times. And we've seen resignations from board members. We've seen a lot of refusals to take money, and we've seen a lot of people scratching off the name above their theatre or their education space. So it's a very, very interesting and fraught time, I would say, in the arts and cultural sector in that respect. Where are we going to find those other people? And then I suppose whilst those kind of major players are sweating it out in the boardroom, our small to medium charities and parts of the sectors are still struggling to fulfill the infrastructure that they need, funds from major donors. There's generally a couple of factors for this. The first being the infrastructure. They just don't have the ability to pay for the skills that they need in order to execute major donor fundraising, because major donor fundraisers, as you all know, are expensive because it's a super high skill set and the return can be amazing. They also have issues investing over a longer period of time. So the institutional cycles in the arts, culture and heritage sector mean that generally budget planning is between 1 to 4 years. That's not really enough time to get a proper major donor program off the ground. So we're seeing lots of people revert back to other types of fundraising as a way of kind of more guaranteeing their budgets year on year. It's also about locations. London in the southeast is great, as we know, but some of our arts and cultural partners across the country are struggling a bit more to find those wealthier donors. And thirdly, I think it's about the propositions. I'm not sure the sector has truly developed robust enough and big enough ambitions, ideas and propositions to attract in that big money. You know, organisations like the ones I mentioned earlier can run 10+ million pound campaigns because they have the assets and the propositions to do so. So I'd like to encourage my arts and cultural fundraisers to think about what their big ideas are and start to really chase that. Although I'm interested, and I would like to know again from the room if there's any examples of this, some of these smaller and medium-sized arts and cultural charities are starting to test out different initiatives, what are often called engagement clusters or maybe super clubs, where you actually bring together a pool of donors for a specific initiative as a sort of giving circle and a way of leveraging maybe higher donations than you would if you approached them as individual prospects. There's a couple of really interesting examples that I'd be happy to talk about in the Q&A section, but I think that's, you know, if there's something to take away from that, focusing in on the people that you already have in your network and finding ways to leverage that as a kind of peer-to-peer giving, I think is quite a good way to start off. If you're not sure about whether you have the capacity to build a major donor program, that's a fantastic place to start. And I think I will leave it there. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dana. We are running out of time, and I still got one thing to cover, which is me to answer one question. How to build a successful major donor program on a shoestring? That's the question for our class. So before I answer that, please raise your hand. Who has been watching Cricket World Cup this year? Or in your household, someone has been watching? Yeah, so there are quite a few people have been watching Cricket World Cup, right? So major gifts program within our sector has been taken as a fancy area of fundraising which only works for bigger charities. That is a big assumption to make, and that's the also reason a lot of small charities did not start their program. I come from small and medium charities, and I always work for small and medium charities. I tell you, it is a wrong assumption, because it is not about doing big things for your major donors. It is about doing small things in a better way, in a big way. And why I asked you, have you been watching the Cricket World Cup or not? You might have seen a guy with a beard. His name is Moeen Ali. Yeah? He's a legend cricketer. He was one of our brand ambassador for 2015 to 16. How we made a good use of his brand ambassadorship in a small way, but a bigger impact. Small mini cricket bag comes for £5, just for £5. Just on Amazon, you might be able to find for £1 as well. Small mini cricket bag. So anyone who donated over £1,000, we were just asking him to sign it and personally thank people and send them. It's small things doing in a bigger way. And that mini bag has gave us a lot of opportunity, not me calling people, people are calling us to thank you. Please thank Moeen Ali on our behalf for sending that. Little does they know it was me sending it. But it was actually signed by Moeen Ali. Yes? So that's what it is, that if you are thinking you don't have a budget, how much a rich tea and a cup of tea costs? Nothing. Probably under £2. So small and medium charities can easily invite their medium or potential prospects to have a meeting with the trustees and their CEO in their offices over a rich tea, biscuits. People will like it. They know you don't have money, and they will appreciate you are not being extravaganza, spending a lot of money on them. They like that. So I just wanted to make that point that is not about big budgets or big teams. It's about being more creative and doing small things in a bigger way. So with any further ado, would like you now to have a question and answer. So please come forward if you have any questions. We are here to answer your questions. Right.
131, does it work here?
I'm not sure that's
Your mics, I don't know how to use them.
Are there any questions?
Any questions? Hands up. Stand up and shout.
Hi, Sarah Jane from Hospice UK. So major donors donate to small charities.
like to answer that?
I'm happy to.
So can you repeat the question, please?
I think, do shout at me if I've got this wrong. So, do major donors donate to small charities? I would say yes if you ask them, and that is the big challenge. It's often really scary to start from scratch, so finding a route in is really difficult. If you can get, if you can get to someone via an existing network, then that's brilliant. But actually, as a major donor in a small organisation, you're offering them something really unique that certainly at Bernardo's we really struggle with, because we're massive. We've got 12,000 staff, 26,000 volunteers, we've got £300,000 plus turnover. And, you know, if you're asking someone to give 5, 10, 20, £50,000, you're essentially making them a much smaller part of the puzzle. If you are turning over £500,000 as an organisation, or even less than that, as long as people can do that, it keeps us out. As if you're offering people to be a bigger part of an organisation, that's really exciting, and they can make a real impact. So that would be my take.
I think it also depends on how you define who a major donor is. Because for Bernardo's, a major donor may be £1 million, whereas for you, a major donor could be £5,000. I think it is the size of the organization and where you have put the threshold. So my answer would be yes, a small organization can attract a major donor. It's just that you really need to actually have a strategy, to have the support of your senior leadership to actually say, okay, we're now going for this level of donations, and actually go for it.
Any further questions? Hands up.
Is a small thank you or a cricket bat or whatever, have you found it to be enough? Or are they more interested in a long relationship and more feedback, giving them more back?
I personally...
Can you repeat the question?
I mean, tell me if I'm wrong, that is a small thank you, is that enough? Or they expect more? I personally believe, I'm a big fan of gratitude within our sector. Thanking donors is never enough. And I personally believe that you need to find 7 different ways to thank your donors. And I've written my recent blog last week for UK Fundraising that thanking donors is the best marketing, right? So no donor will ever tell you, oh, don't call me for a thank you, or don't send me that note as a thank you. If you are not making an ask and you're just thanking donors, do as many times you can, as long as they allowed you to contact them. So that's what I believe, and thank you is the best way, by the way, to build relationships. If you want to use a 20-80 rule in a thank you, I mean in major donor fundraising, I teach that as well to my students, that our sector spends 80% of their resources and energy before thank you. And when it comes to thank you and after, we are like, you know what, I'm too tired. Thank you so much for donating £50,000, and that's it. But thank you is not to end. Thank you was an opportunity to make a relationship further. So why we are spending 80% of resources, energies, and all that thinking before thank you? Because we always take a thank you just as an obligation, because it's a good thing to do, not as an opportunity. Until we take thank you as an opportunity, we'll be successful. That's my take. I hope it's helpful.
Sorry if I'm saying too much. Think about it as a love affair. Because a healthy one. Because honestly, if you want this person to be your friend and to be your lover and to be the person that you wake up thinking about, it stops being an issue of how small and how big and thank you. It's a continuous relationship that you just simply enjoy. So you think about them. What do they want for their birthday? What do they want to know about you? What do they want to know about your organization? If you have that attitude, then that question, you won't be asking it anymore.
And certainly, actually, that's my personal experience, having worked in the Middle East,
Yes.
is that they are so interested in business, in what family you come from, what your background is, what your hobbies are, before they'll even sit around any table to do any business deal.
I think you've answered your own question. Don't stalk them, but just be their friend and just let them breathe and leave your organization. And believe me, naturally, the gift will come.
Cool. Okay. The mic's still not working. Natasha, can you shout your question to
I will
us?
shout my question very loudly. I'm kind of minded, or kind of what comes to mind from listening to all of your conversations is something about that time, treasure, talent aspect of major donors. And I know you've referenced kind of ROI as being a metric that is a metric that the major donor programs are measured by. I just wondered whether any of you had experience of metrics that spanned that kind of time, treasure, talent, and you've got some examples whereby it's not just about the numbers, but actually allows for some metrics around these kind of relationship building pieces that you've all spoken to as being so important in major donor fundraising.
And so really a small practical example is that a colleague of mine who worked at a smaller arts charity just made sure that they introduced small metrics like the number of coffees that they went out for that month. And just, I think it's those smaller things as well, that mapping it along that cultivation timeline, you know, that strategy, and saying what are the metrics across all of them, means that the asking metric, the money metric, just becomes part of a small part and an important part of a much bigger and longer puzzle. So I would always say kind of go to your moves management steps and look at what those create little KPIs for each of those relating to those other aspects can be a really simple, nice way of doing that.
I totally agree. I don't know if this is helpful or confusing, but one of the things I've just recently done is my job is to worry about ROI and money and expenditure. The things that my team are measured on now, there are 5 things. Now this is going to be a test. Meetings, calls, engagements, proposals, and what's the other one? Impact reporting. If you get the inputs right, the outputs follow. So actually now those are the 5 KPIs that we track as a team, and then I worry about the rest. But
I mean, it's. I'm lucky that I come from a large organization, so I've got a bit of room for maneuver. But we also are stepping away from the financial year KPIs, which means that if a relationship takes 18 months, it takes 18 months. But we know that at the end of the 18 months, the result will be so much bigger. As opposed to your KPIs need to be happening in the financial year, and so you end up pushing the donor to give you what they can now, as opposed to having that love affair that goes on forever.
Maybe asked too early. I work with a lot of small charities, and I think having some practical examples of some alternative KPIs rather than it's all about the money might be helpful for those, particularly for those smaller charities.
Okay, we have time for one more question if anyone wants to ask.
I'll speak loud. Just a quick one. I work at the Roundhouse, and we kind of, what I feel is we try and rely on the same major donors every time. And I'm getting to the point now, I'm like, okay, let's do an intimate event, right? We'll invite the same people and the same people. And at what point do you go, we need new people, and how do you start that sort of thing?
I have to say, having stopped working there about 6 or 7 years ago, you know, the patrons list that I manage is still very much the patrons list that's there, and so I completely know where you're coming from, and very specifically so. I know one of the things that we'd trialled, funnily enough, back at the Roundhouse in a previous iteration in order to introduce new donors to the pool was by doing some really interesting geographic mapping, which I was responsible for. So it took a little while for the data and analysis team to go, that's okay for you to do, but essentially involved mapping out the people that we did know, literally popping them on a Google map, on all that free software, populating them, and then saying, that person can go to that person for a cup of sugar and a chat.
But rather than asking for a cup of sugar and a chat, what we did was we then trialled putting on small-scale dinners and events that were sort of like pop-up performances by some of the young people that worked at the Roundhouse there as well, as just a way of, and actually what the feedback from that a lot of the time with the patrons who were willing to trial it was saying, I hadn't actually spoken to my neighbour next door. Actually, it was just a really nice way for me to get people on. So some of that literal mapping can be so effective in terms of bringing new people into the fold. I think it's just about having a really clear strategy and an interesting proposition in order to convince the management or whoever needs to sign off on it on how to do it. So, yeah.
I mean, from the onset, you may want to use your peer-to-peer relationships, but you want to take the money initially out of the equation, whereby if they have been supporting you, ask them not to give you money now, but to bring a friend.
Yeah.
So that you are asking them to do something that is a little easier, so that when they bring that friend, then that friend brings someone else, and then you start working with those two who lead you to others. So try the peer-to-peer thing, but without really asking them to come and donate, but to come and bring someone else that you've never met.
Yeah, we do quite a lot of cultivation events. We do like a chairman's dinner, so our chairman Simon invites people, and they invite people, and they invite people, and they kind of network. So I guess we do that, but for me, I'm very new to major donors. I'm very much sporting, events, background, fundraising.
Yeah.
So for me, this is totally different. And I'm used to being able to get the general public to take part in events, and now I'm looking at kind of people with more wealth. So it's just seeing how that is very different.
Have you thought about looking at, I don't know if you have like volunteers within the Roundhouse, and like looking at how perhaps connecting with your volunteers and perhaps showing them about new projects, taking them a tour like what's happening new, and then they might be able to be going within the community and talking about it. And that's something that we're starting to do a lot more now, and my charity is actually using our volunteers to help. So not our major donor volunteers, I'm talking about actual people that volunteer an hour a day doing something within the charity. And because you'll be it can be quite surprising to see that some of these volunteers have really good connections, and that could help.
I think it's also just worth exploring, just on a very macro level. Individual giving in the UK market's about 10 billion a year roughly. It's something like that. That has not changed for a really long time. Okay, there was a little dip maybe in 2008, 2009, but on the whole, we're not really getting that many more people generally being more philanthropic and wanting to give. So I can understand, and I think what's happened in the wider sector is that a lot of charities have focused on supporter experience and how can we make the relationships with the people who are giving to us now stronger and better so that they continue to give, grow their giving, or give in multiple ways. And I think that now the arts sector is starting to go, hang on, we need to be doing really the same approach. So in a way, I can understand strategically why it's been the case that the pool of people that you have are the ones that continue to be invited and kind of supported, because that nurturing needs to happen in ways that they can grow their giving in other ways. So, yeah.
I'd like, on behalf of the committee, to thank all the speakers. We've got a small present from us all, and I'm sure you'd like to give them all a round of applause. Thank you very
Thank you so much to all our wonderful speakers. We've learned about international donations, the power of relationships, hot trends in the future, altruistic entrepreneurs, and the importance of thanking. Please diarise next month for the 3rd of October. It's going to be a session on individual giving. We have Lee Dirk from Cat Protection and Alex Wood from the Salvation Army talking about how they blended traditional marketing with digital to great success. We're expecting the event to sell out, so book your ticket quickly. Thank you so much for coming tonight. Please help us by clearing the chairs to the side of the room, and there will be food served in a moment. Thank you.
See these dinner.